Hey everyone, when anybody ever mentions Atari, it's either looked at with a great legacy or a company that could have been great. And the reason it's looked at so fondly is because of the Atari 2600.
Ah, the Atari 2600. Who knew three curved lines could start a revolution? Being credited as one of the first game consoles of all time, the Atari 2600 did a lot right. Originally founded by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney in 1972, Atari was first meant to be an arcade manufacturer. One of their first big success stories was the Pong machine in 1972, which shook the world by storm. But today, we are talking about the Atari 2600, not Pong. Atari was doing great with their arcade cabinets, so they wanted to make a home video game console. While not the first game console with interchangeable cartridges, definitely one of the most iconic. Credit goes to the Magnavox Odyssey for being the first game console with interchangeable cartridges, and right before we got the Atari 2600, we got the Fairchild F, if anyone even remembers that. Now, while I don't personally own the 2600, I do own this flashback console with a bunch of old Atari games, which is pretty neat. Originally codenamed Project Stella, the Atari 2600 released in 1977. It was first called the Atari VCS, not the 2600. The name was later changed in 1982 to the Atari 2600. This is how it looks. I think it looks quite nice. The wood in the front makes it seem fancy. There are also a couple of other models, this one being known as the Darth Vader model because of the black wood finish. We also got the Atari 2600 Junior in 1983, which looks like this. It was basically the same except for its smaller form factor and cheaper price point. But anyways, the Atari 2600 launched in 1977 with 9 simple low-resolution games and 2 KB cartridges. The system's first killer game was the home conversion of Taito's arcade game Space Invaders in 1980. Some versions also came with the game Combat, which is a game where two players could control tanks and shoot each other to try to win. Also, just in general, the Atari 2600 had some pretty good games. For example, it had Adventure, which is credited as the first game with an Easter egg. Also, Breakout was a popular game and was really fun with the paddle controller. And when the 2600 came out, it became very successful, leading to the founding of Activision and other third-party game developers. In 1982, the Atari 2600 had a huge library of games and a huge player base. No one could even try to reach the greatness of Atari. It had some great games like Space Invaders, Centipede, and Pitfall. But one thing you'll notice about these games is that they really don't hold up that too well. Some games are better than others. Most of the sports games are pretty bad, although I do enjoy Atari Bowling. It's just that with today's standards, this had a very weak components, meaning the games were very simplistic and mostly high score based. Playing this today, it's pretty painful. The games just don't hold up that well. But at the same time, it was still pretty crazy to play video games at your own house and not in an arcade, so everything was looking good for Atari. But then we started to see the beginning of the end. Some competitions started showing up, and they were promising. Consoles like the Intellivision and ColecoVision were doing quite well, and Atari released some games that really hurt their reputation. One of the most famous ones is E.T. for the 2600. This game was really rushed and just really confusing to play. There are a lot of really interesting documentaries about it, but the basics are that Atari wanted this game to be done by the holiday season. Howard Scott Warshaw was the only person working on the game, and Atari only gave him 5 weeks to make it, so as a result, it was very rushed and unfinished. Another was Pac-Man. While it did become the best-selling game for the Atari 2600, people were expecting a straight conversion from the arcades, so people were disappointed when the final product wasn't that. Then, finally, in 1984, as a result of the video game crash of 1983, the home console and computer divisions of the original Atari Inc. were sold off. And you would think that's the end, right? But nah, Atari couldn't take no for an answer and kept on trying to make the next best gaming console, and they kept on failing miserably. Their latest game console, the Atari VCS, well, not that Atari VCS, this Atari VCS. It came out in 2021, and it has a lot of mixed reviews, but I think it's fairly decent.
All in all, the Atari 2600 had and still has a great legacy. From the amazing games or just what the Atari 2600 created, this was an incredible console. Can't say that about the Jaguar though. That was a mistake.